Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Holy Smoke, Cigars and Spirituality. I'm Christian Smith, the Heretic, the host. We're here for another amazing conversation. I'm joined by two incredible people from our team today. We have Grayson the Pundit. We got Karima the Truth, the newly named Karima the Truth. So
She's
fitting.
She's been christened.
Exactly. Exactly. So we're here today to have a discussion about privilege. Is it privilege or is it a blessing? What is privilege? How does privilege function? I'm so curious. I just want to know. That's why I have you two, so you guys can help me figure this thing out.
Oh my.
Because I need somebody to help me out with this. As we as we're so we have. Let me see. I think we have 4 more episodes to finish out the first season, which will take us through the end of July. So for the rest of the season, we're going to unpack some different concepts that tie into some of the racial disparities we see in our society right now. Tiger Gibson, one of our cast members. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Tiger.
Um, and so we're gonna go through some topics here. We're gonna start with privilege today. We'll talk a little bit about allyship in the next episode, and then I forget what the other episodes are, but it'll be good stuff. We want to have a forum to be able to unpack some of these topics with justice as the main goal. I think it's important when we have these conversations that we understand the lens through which people are looking. Because if we're looking at it from a lens of maintaining status quo, if we look at it from a lens of maintaining the power of those in power, then the conversation will sound a lot different. So anybody that engages Holy Smoke should understand we're looking at it through a lens of restorative justice. How do we make all people whole? So that is the lens through which we have these discussions. That is how these people came together. So I want to allow my two friends here to introduce themselves. Let's just go in order with who's on the screen. Let's start with Grayson and Karima. Introduce yourself. What are you drinking? I know both of you are indoors, so you're not smoking today. And then I'll come back after you guys and talk about what I got going on. Grayson, Karima.
Well, it is a privilege to be here.
Yes, it is.
And a blessing.
Here we go.
I love it.
Contrary to all of the words that just came out of my mouth, I am not drinking right now. But I do have some corner cut coffee, and I have in case anybody had doubts, I am drinking kombucha because I am a white man. So in case y'all were curious or doubting my status, it is still very much alive. And I'm actually back in Atlanta for a little bit. Came back in time for Juneteenth because I knew there'd be a lot of stuff going on that I wanted to be a part of. More in a ally protestatory capacity. But yeah, so I'm back here at least for a couple of weeks. So I'm happy to be back in the ATL. And was there another question, Christian, or is that it?
Nah. I just wanted you to introduce yourself. That's it. No special questions today. Unless you have something special you want to share besides it's a blessing and a privilege to be here.
I don't think it gets more special than that, so I'm going to pass it off to the truth.
All right, the truth.
Woo, you guys are so amazing. My name is Karima Akila. They call me the truth. The truth is what they call me. That's what they said. My name is, and that's what I answer to. I am drinking some coffee. I'm not sure what kind. It might be Cafe Du Monde or something else. And I am just so full. My heart is so full. The day after Juneteenth and all that means, and just full of love and life and yesterday was a beautiful day, just being with the people that I love and just reflecting on history and whatnot. And so it's so good to see you two gentlemen again. And I miss all of our other friends. And it's so good to see our friends that are joining us virtually. And I'm so excited and can't wait to get into this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Cream of the truth. I also celebrated Juneteenth with my family, which was an awesome experience. And I want to send a special happy birthday shout out to Greg DeLoach, the bearded sage.
Hey, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday to Greg DeLoach. Today, I'm back with my girlfriend, Fat Bottom Betty. Grateful for that. And I am drinking some Old Forester today. Yeah, so Old Forester with a little agave and lime is what I'm doing. And it's really good.
Okay.
It's really good. Yeah, so today we want to talk about this whole topic of privilege. Plain and simple. So one rule that we have at Holy Smokes is that we respect each other's lived experience. Doesn't matter whether you engage us on Instagram, Facebook, whether you meet with us virtually every single month. We have one rule: respect each other's lived experience, because a lot of times when we have conversations about faith and life and theology, we tend to lift our theories over the experience of actual people. So the challenge here is, when you encounter somebody's lived experience and it contradicts your theory or your doctrine, that you take that as an opportunity to learn from what that person has lived. Very simple, very straightforward. That's the only non-negotiable here. That's based in Greatest Commandment Theology, which is a brand of theology that I've curated over the past few years. It's very simple. It says that your love for God is displayed in how you love your neighbor, which is an extension of how you love yourself. It's based in Matthew 24:34-40, and many other places in scripture, actually. And what that basically means is that you can't fully love God if you don't love your neighbor. And you can't fully love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. So I'm excited that my book will be released within the next month or so. I'm really excited about that, which talks a lot about Greatest Commandment theology and how the framework functions. So I look forward to being able to get that out and give people an opportunity to read it and interact with it. I can't wait. Like, I'm really excited about it, because I have conversations all the time with people who are trying to figure out how to live in a modern day faith without a lot of the rule keeping theology that we've always practiced that just doesn't fit. And I believe my book will provide some clarity to that topic. But today we're talking about privilege. It's a trigger word in our society because it makes people uncomfortable, as well it should. Generally, when we use the term privilege, it primarily makes white people uncomfortable, which it should. But I think there are more people who need to be made uncomfortable by the term privilege. So today's conversation is not just about white privilege. We're going to zoom out. White privilege will be a part of the conversation, but we're not just talking about white privilege. We're talking about privilege in general. So my initial question to kind of get us started is, what is privilege? Grayson, do you have any thoughts on what is privilege?
I am now unmuted. So, yeah, I'm trying to think about this, because I feel like in any ideology, whether it's like Christianity, a political ideology, I feel like sometimes we can learn what something means and then use the term or tell the story so often that we kind of forget the original meaning. And I think like we do that with the gospel, right? Like this incredible story about, brown, politically black refugee, carpenter, killed by the state, etc. Regardless of what angle you take with it, we can tell that story so often that then we're like, oh wait, what does that actually mean? It's like you say a word over and over again and it loses its meaning. It sounds really weird. So
Yeah.
privilege, I think, has become kind of that word for me because we use it so often, especially as a white man with lots of other privileges. I have to and am forced to think about it all the time. So I was trying to like rediscover that initial meaning, and surprisingly, I think our good friend Louis Giglio actually kind of helped. I think in a similar manner to how Trump recently said something to the effect of, if it weren't for voter suppression, Republicans would never be elected again. And we were like, yeah, okay, yeah. I think Louis Giglio, pastor of Passion City Church here in Atlanta, which my question to them is, what are you actually passionate about? But that's a whole other question.
Shots fired. Shots fired. Okay. He's on his ish today.
Now they've been throwing that ish on me for a long time.
All right, we'll keep going.
So I think Louis Giglio, those of y'all who didn't see, because it's been a whole 2 years of news cycles in 2 weeks, who didn't see, Louis Giglio, and if I get this wrong, please one of y'all step in, was having a conversation with Lecrae, and I don't know the other person. Do y'all remember the other person?
CEO of Chick-fil-A.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. So many angles. And the part that people are talking about the most is Louis Giglio saying like, and this isn't his voice, but it's his voice, where he's just like, now I think that privilege just shuts down the conversation and we need to talk about white blessing. And of course that understandably sent up a firestorm. But I think he's actually revealing something. I think in these moments of crisis, the scriptures tell us that the rocks cry out. And for someone to arrive at that conclusion, think that it's okay to say on a national, if not international platform, that their heart is probably made of stone, and that rock actually cried out. And that rock cried out that truth to his statement that he is was at the same time trying to deny and expressing. And that truth is that for many of us who have whatever privileges we have, privilege is a blessing. It fits the definition of grace that we, cheap grace, to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that we have put on what Jesus did to us. It's something that we didn't earn. It's something that we have to work to pay for. We have to feel guilty about what happened for us to earn this thing. And of course, we stop short of realizing that privilege is unearned benefits, unearned health insurance, unearned Delta Club miles, whatever it is that we didn't apply for, that we got anyway at the expense of somebody else. And so and again, my thoughts are so disjointed because it's such a complex topic, but I think, at least in this Christian Louis Giglioian perspective, we have whitened the concept of grace, but we stop short of realizing, like, okay, so if we earned this, who erected the cross? Who put Jesus there? Why was Jesus there? Why do we have this grace? And so it's just like, just this complete, man, I don't even know what to say. It's just this complete misunderstanding of how the world works, and feeling a moral vacuum like open up beneath our feet, realizing what's going on somewhere in our hearts, somewhere in our guts, but not taking that second step to like do the hard work of breaking the rock that has like grown over our heart. And so
I
I
feel
think it
like
is.
I was gonna say I
Go
feel like
ahead.
the thing that resonated with me the most of what you said was that something that we received that came at somebody else's expense.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think that's
Yeah, and
what
that's what.
separates it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but for like the white supremacist evangelical Christian, because I do think evangelicalism is just white supremacy dressed up in a purple robe as opposed to a white one. I think, yeah, I think we have just accepted our privilege as grace. We didn't earn this, but what do we do? And we have to realize that it's not grace, it's genocide. It's lots of things that we need to stand up against. My thoughts are everywhere. Someone else talk.
Yeah, Karima, what do you think? The
So,
truth, talk to us.
so when we look at the meaning of words is very important. And so, Gracie, when you were talking about, we use these terms, and through time, we begin to lose the context of what they mean. The definition of privilege means a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. A special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available. So either someone gives it to you, or through various circumstances, it is made available only to this particular person or group. So it's almost something that I feel like the recipient of privilege didn't do anything to get it, because it was something that was given to them or made available. And so it's not like most times the person that is privileged did anything in order to receive that privilege or to create a space for them to be privileged. Now, yes, the very first people, who made the decision and said, I want this special advantage, right, or immunity, sure. But then everyone after them, if they are of that particular group, then they receive it in perpetuity. But they didn't do anything, in order to make it happen.
Yeah.
So I look at it, there's racial implications there. There's also class implications there. For instance, I grew up in Philadelphia. I just had this conversation with someone last night, and I grew up in Mount Airy. Now, this was back in the day. Mount Airy then and Mount Airy now are two different Mount Airies. Mm-hmm. But I had cousins and whatnot that lived in West Philly. And so my cousins in West Philly would say to me, you ain't really from Philly, you from Mount Airy, you from Germantown. And the implication there was that because of the zip code that my parents chose, it afforded me a certain degree of immunity in the eyes of my cousins who lived in the inner city. And so, in their eyes, it granted me an advantage. Now, I didn't do anything about that. My parents chose that, right? But I received a particular right or advantage, so my cousins thought, because of something that my parents did. So then I remember in those conversations, me feeling kind of like, well, so what you trying to say about me? I didn't do anything about where I live, and truth be told, I ain't really no better than you. You might think that I am, but we got the same struggles. You know what I'm saying? Our life get cut off too if we don't go ahead and make this money, bring home this check. So I just find that it is. I think the part that my mind is looking at right now, and the part that I want to unpack for me is who created these special rights, advantages, or immunities in order to grant them to someone else. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's number one. And then number two, for those of us, because to a degree, like you said, Christian, is broader than just race. We all are privileged in some way, shape, or form. What do you do then with the privilege that someone else created for you? and granted to you or made available to you, what do you do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Privilege is not a sin. I think that's one thing that we need to understand. Having privilege is not a sin. It does require responsibility, though. Like, so I think the sin is in having the privilege, being willfully ignorant of the privilege that you have and not taking any responsibility with the privilege that you have.
Yeah.
And that goes beyond race, like we said. So y'all know I'm a preacher. So I tend to break things down in points. So
preacher, really?
Right.
How many points, preacher? How many points?
Oh, you gotta have 3. You gotta have 3.
He might be
if you don't if you don't have 3 points, you have not preached.
The Trinitarian model.
Right. You got to have 3 points and you didn't preach. No, I do not subscribe to that. I believe that is a viable way to preach, but not the only way to preach. But it's the tradition I was raised in where, every sermon had at least 3 points. So when I think about privilege, I think about it in 3 points. And I talk about this a little bit in my book, but privilege, like both of you have said, is something that you are granted that you did not earn, that comes at the expense of someone else, particularly within this context where we're speaking. Privilege that we share or that we have comes at the expense of another, and I did not earn it. So me not earning it does not make it a sin, but it does require some responsibility. So number one, something you're granted that you did not earn, that comes at someone else's expense. But some people stop there and think, well, I haven't been granted anything. Nobody gave me anything. I had to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and everybody else can do the same thing, because that is some people's like holistic perspective of privilege, when that's just one aspect of privilege. The second aspect of privilege, in my opinion, is the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. A lot of people don't recognize that some of us have the benefit of the doubt within our overarching societal structures. I'll give you an example of my privilege as a Black man in the church, in the Black church particularly. Nobody questioned my call to preach when I said I was called to preach. I just had the benefit of the doubt.
Wow.
Men are preachers. So when I said I was called to preach, everybody said, okay, great. Let's set up your initial sermon. You're going to be amazing. I get the benefit of the doubt as a man who says God has called me to preach. Now, my lady counterparts, on the other hand, do not get the benefit of the doubt. Oftentimes, they're questioned. They're told that that's not God. They don't get that benefit of the doubt of just being assumed to be a preacher. So privilege is not just what you're granted that you didn't earn, that comes at somebody else's expense. It's also the benefit of the doubt. It's just assumed. And then the last thing that Karima brought up is the whole concept of immunity. That is so important. That to me, that is such an important aspect of privilege, because a lot of times people think because I wasn't given anything, I had to work hard. People don't realize the immunity that they have from certain forms of discrimination and oppression.
Now, qualified immunity or just immunity?
Just immunity. Because if we look at immunity from a scientific perspective, it's systems in the body that shield us from certain diseases. Yeah. So when we look at privilege in the societal structure and in this, overarching concept of society, there are systems in place that make certain people in society immune from certain forms of discrimination. Yep. From certain forms of oppression. And the problem with many of us who are privileged, we don't recognize the immunity aspect of our privilege because we're immune to it. If you're immune to something, you never had to experience it. So for you to understand that you are privileged, you have to first acknowledge that other people are not immune to the thing you've never experienced.
Man.
Come on.
So we need to look at privilege from a holistic perspective and not just what I got that was granted to me that I didn't earn, because that may not necessarily apply to everybody. But that immunity piece, that's the piece that requires a little bit of work. That's the piece that requires people to say, you know what, I have a great relationship with the police. But I hear a lot of people, particularly Black people, who have these stories in their communities that their relationship is terrible, and not necessarily because of something that they did. But that's not my experience. Maybe I need to listen to the experience of others, because maybe I have the privilege of immunity when it comes to a bad relationship with police officers. So that's my take on what is privilege as a whole. How do you two see, or okay, Karima, I see the finger wag. Okay, give us some truth, Karima.
Listen, what you just said, just for me, had this huge aha moment. That word immunity, right? When you look at the definition, I'm a words person. So protection or exemption from something, especially an obligation or a penalty. Right? Then also going into the body, the ability of an organism to resist a particular infection or toxin by the action of specific antibodies or sensitized white blood cells. So when we look at just our body, our immune system, right? Right now we're all going through COVID-19, right? When your immune system receives a vaccine, right? The very first time that your immune system receives some type of virus that it's never seen before, they tell you that the virus is live in your body, and your body is having a reaction to this virus that it just received that it's never had before. And the reason why doctors want to vaccinate children, right? They give them a little itty bitty, it's just a teeny tiny little bit of the doses, because if you give them too much, then it will overwhelm the system, right? And then your body will have the full blown effects of this disease. What I witnessed in the past couple of weeks was the white immunity, the white immune system finally receiving a larger dose of this virus that we call racism. I'm going around like, what the hell wrong with y'all? Like, y'all flipping out. Like, what the hell? Like, what start? Like, my white friends are like, oh my God. Like, they're ripping their, napping their teeth, and, what I'm saying? Like, they're in true, Old Testament. And like, what the hell? Like, what I'm witnessing is a shock to their immune system. Exactly what happens when you have been in a safety bubble and something has pierced the veil of that protection, and now your body doesn't know what the hell to do. And so when you said that click, like, that is exactly what's happening right now in white America and these here United States. That their system finally received a large enough doses in order for it to shock their system.
And for a lot of people,
all of that.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, white people in particular, it was the election of Trump that kind of started it.
Because the Great Awakening is what some sociologists are calling it.
Yeah, because like if you watch the Saturday Night Live after the election, where Dave Chappelle was the host, they did that whole skit where Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock, and Chris Rock were watching the election results with their white friends, and their white friends were like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Oh my God, the end of the world. And Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock were like, we're not surprised at all. Like, like, you guys didn't know this is the country that we live in? Right. You guys are surprised that this happened in this country? Like, we've been going through this our whole lives. Why are you so shocked? Right. Yeah. And like Karima said, your immune system just got hit with something.
You've never seen this shit before. Yeah.
Yeah, this some next level shit right here.
Yeah, it is.
Exactly. So the question is, how do we see privilege play out in our society? Let's kind of expand on that. Where do you see privilege playing out in society?
The fact that we have a society.
Talk about it.
And I'm just going to preface and say that for some reason, it might be the spirit forcing me to listen more than I speak. But my thoughts are just all over the place today. And y'all are speaking so much clear truth and so logically and clearly structured. So I might just be listening more today. But yeah, like the fact that we, like when people say, I don't know, just the fact that we have a society, the fact that we have a country at all is an example of privilege, an example of a constructed reality constructed for the purpose of bestowing upon some immunity, bestowing upon some rights or privileges that are perceived as rights and benefits and perks of membership, and denying it to other people. Because if you come at it from a myth of scarcity, which is one of the foundational tenets of capitalism, that there isn't enough to go around and that the pie is not big enough for everybody, then if you approach it with that mentality, then you think it's better for me to hoard resources, to kill entire groups of people, to invade land, because if I don't get this, then someone else will, as opposed to a more communal mentality. I didn't say communist, but sure, communist mentality or socialist mentality. I'm not one to base my entire worldview on the economic system because they all can fail, but whatever. That's a whole other conversation. But the very fact that we have a society is an exertion of privilege. Like every square inch of this country is doused in blood and bones. The fact that we have a city called Atlanta is an exertion of privilege, that we denied someone else access to something so that we could have access to it. And so I think that's in one starting place. But then I think how it functions in our society is that I was thinking about, while Karima, you were talking, waking up in the morning. So like, when in more normal times, when you have like a more routine schedule and you have to wake up, let's say I woke up at 6:15 every morning to go to school and work out and do all the things that I felt like I had to do as a performative person. And rarely was I ever happy at the alarm clock whenever it woke me up. Some days you wake up and you have that like Folgers commercial, like stretching and like, another day to be alive. But most of the time I woke up and I was just like, oh damn, why do I have to wake up? And I think that's how it plays out in society, where like people who are lulled into sleep, who are encouraged to stay asleep, which is why I think as interesting and problematic as the term woke can be, I think it does have, especially when white people like took it from Black culture, we do everything. I think it does have some connotations that are valid, in the sense that you are encouraged to stay asleep because sleep is comfortable and sleep keeps you, it keeps you, I don't want to say blind because it can be ableist, but it keeps
unconscious.
You unconscious. Yes, unconscious to things that are going on around you. And so when you wake up in the morning, whatever it is that causes you to wake up, whether it's the Trump election or whether it's a person of color who no longer adheres to your standards of professionalism or respectability or politeness, and is like, no, don't touch my hair. No, don't say that. No, don't vote like that, whatever. Or it's a Supreme Court decision that protects DACA recipients, or that protects LGBTQ people from workplace discrimination. Because I'm sure that was a wake-up call for a bunch of straight people, and like a moment of reckoning, either, oh wow, maybe this is something I need to get behind, or this country's fallen further down the tracks. Whichever one it is, like, there are those moments when we wake up. But when we wake up in the morning, we don't blame the capitalist structure of we have to work ourselves to death so that we don't die. We don't blame.
Hold on. Wait. We have to work ourselves to death so that we don't die. That was good, man. You know, you got to pause when you say stuff like that. You gotta let that stuff marinate.
That man, let it breathe.
Yeah. Just let that saturate the atmosphere real quick.
Yeah.
Capitalism requires us to work ourselves to death so that we don't die.
Put that on a t-shirt.
Mm-hmm. All right, go ahead, Grayson.
That's good.
Okay, I'm just gonna sip tea. Tequila, actually, that's what this is. One of the things I added tequila to my kombucha. Multiculturalism.
I love it.
It's actually really good. So yeah, so we don't think in the morning, oh man, I just hate the fact that we have to work at a job that we probably don't like to get money that we wish we could have more of so that we could buy food so that our family doesn't die. And I just really want to overturn the system. That's why I'm so mad at waking up. We say, oh, F that alarm clock. And so we blame the alarm clock and punch it and snooze and snooze and snooze and snooze and snooze until finally we have to get up and do something. And so I think how it plays out in society is that if you don't think about, we don't think about when we wake up, because waking up as in birth is a traumatic experience. You've been living this one reality for, in the literal metaphor, hours or years or decades or generations, and then something causes you to wake up. First of all, it is traumatic. It's a complete shift, and your body has to reset, and you have to regain consciousness. But so often people of privilege, not just white people, particularly white people, but not just white people, men, cisgender people, straight people, rich people, able-bodied people, etc., often will blame the person that made them uncomfortable and not the system that made them comfortable in the first place.
There you go.
And so, and that was a long way to get to that point. But if I were somebody who weren't as awake, who hadn't had my alarm clocks ring earlier, then I might blame Karima or Christian for saying some of the things they did earlier. I'd be like, no, that's not the case. How dare you? And I think, and so we have to stop blaming the alarm clocks that wake us up and instead blame the systems that cause us to have to wake up so early in the first place, to continue the metaphor. And when we blame the alarm clocks, it looks like Central Park Cindy, I don't know if people are calling her that, I'm going to call her that, calling the phone on, was it Christian Cooper? Was that his name?
I think so.
Calling the phone on or calling the police, there it is, on Christian Cooper and lying and all of that nonsense. It looks like police brutality. It looks like Black people getting fired for their hair color or for their unprofessional law. They're saying, hey, when you said this in the meeting, it made me feel this way. We punch the alarm clocks instead of, and that's what that looks like. And so we have to widen our focus, be adults, and actually respond to things as adults do and not continue to act like children, because that's what whiteness encourages and other forms of privilege. It rewards being infantile. It rewards being fragile. It rewards being just inhuman. And so then we have to continue to wake up, because a life lived in sleep is a great way to get bed sores. And a life lived in sleep is a great way to be dead, because if you sleep your entire life, then what difference is that from death? And so when the alarm clocks ring, don't punch the snooze, don't return back into your sleep, but instead respond to the light that's breaking into your windows.
Right?
Yeah. So I wanna first of all, I just saw that Blake had said he didn't get a chance to hear what I was smoking. I'm doing the Fat Bottom Betty. Today is the Fat Bottom Betty Day. That's my girlfriend. Yes, I have a wife and a girlfriend. Thank you. That's how I'm living. So, and then also while you were talking, Grayson, Cody asked a question. Is privilege defined from the perspective of the oppressed? Karima, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that it can be defined by both. That there are those that receive the privilege, and then there are those that are of the group that did not. And so from those that have received the privilege, of course, they have their own perspective. I think that the word privilege is the word itself is defined by those who receive it, because that's what it is. It is you are the recipient of this special right, advantage, or immunity. And so, from those that receive the privilege, you can see life through that worldview versus those that have not received that privilege, and you view life from that worldview. One thing I wanted to, and I think this example will further clarify the question. Christian, you asked, where does privilege play out? And from the viewpoint of those that have the privilege, one demonstration of where that plays out is surprise. I have found that when talking about terms of race or class, that those that have the privilege that perceive me as not having it are surprised when they see that I have attained some of the same rights that they have, or some of the same characteristics that they have. And it plays out so subtly that if you're not conscious of it, it'll just breeze right over and you'll think that it was nothing. The scene that comes to my mind is from The Color Purple, right? One of my favorite scenes, right? You know, you got Miss Sophia and her children there, and here come Miss Millie. Really looking at the children, you know how they do. She was looking at their faces, and she said, "Oh, your children so clean.
Oh God!
Don't you want to come work for me?" Right? And we all know what happened. Miss Sophia says, "Hell's no." That shocked Miss Millie because number one, the surprise was Miss Millie didn't expect in her world for colored children to be this clean, right? That's number one. And then number two, she was also surprised and shocked that Miss Sophia would not jump at the chance in order to be employed by Miss Millie. I also see that playing out in my life. At my grandmother's house, when I would answer the phone, this is so wow. So I would, like I said, I went to private schools, K through 12. I learned the King's English for whatever that's worth. So whenever I would answer the phone at my grandmother's house, right? When my grandmother got on the phone, her friends would say, "Geraldine, you got a white child at your house? Who that white child that answered the phone?" Because for them, now society would see, you know, my Black granny and her friends as those that are outside of the borders of privilege. So you take these people and they're accustomed to hearing a Black child talk and speak and sound a certain way. But when they heard my voice, I sounded to them like those that have received the privilege. Because in many ways, because of the sacrifice that my parents made, I did, right? And so then here I am then juxtaposed or caught between these two intersections of privilege and not. And that's a whole nother conversation, right? Knowing the duality of privilege, knowing when to use it and when not to use it and how to use it. I mean, that goes back to, if we want to talk real, that goes back to, you know, times when you had light-skinned Blacks versus dark-skinned Blacks and those who could pass. And they understood that their passing was their privilege. They understood that because their skin was lighter than a brown paper bag, that afforded them certain opportunities and immunities and rights that their darker skin counterparts did not have. And so they would use that privilege in order to benefit somebody else. All of that is part of privilege. And all of that talks about, is it defined from the perspective of the oppressed or those who have gained the right of that privilege? And so, of course, there's experiences in both, but there's a responsibility again. Another example, one time just recently, I was at a hotel gathering with some of my sorority sisters and their friends and family. And, you know, it wasn't a particular event where everyone had on paraphernalia. It was just a large group of Black people gathered in a hotel, and we were eating. And so I got coffee, and this white lady walks up to me, and she says, coffee in hand, and all the people are sitting over there. And she said, "Excuse me." And I turned around. I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, what's happening? What's going on? And that's exactly what I did. I kind of chuckled. And I said, no, because her privilege was saying, y'all doing something that we didn't think y'all could do. Like, why y'all all up in here? What y'all doing? And I said,
what are y'all doing?
What y'all doing? We're eating breakfast. We do that. You know what I'm saying? Colored folks, we do eat breakfast. We're drinking coffee. Like you, ma'am. We just having some coffee. That's all. That's all those good niggers is doing. We just having us some coffee, some plain. But for her, it was a surprise for her to, I don't know what she was surprised about, to see a bunch of Black folks sitting down, cutting their pancakes and eggs. I don't understand. But something in her mind, this wasn't supposed to happen. Just a large gathering of maybe she expected us to behave in a certain way. So that privilege all plays out in different regards. And many times I personally feel myself caught at that intersection between those two worlds.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Christian.
I was going to point out that question that Ariana just posed. Do you think this is where part of the disconnect comes in because we aren't coming from the same definition? And she says, I've heard some describe teaching about specifically white privilege as teaching white people to hate themselves, which confuses me. And I believe that's definitely the case, that if we don't understand the definition of a thing, we won't know how to process it. We won't know how to internalize it and how to adjust to its reality once we are exposed to it, because we never even understood the definition of it. So we don't understand the definition of privilege. So we can't have a reasonable, productive conversation when people don't even understand the definition. Right. We can't have a productive conversation about policing when we don't understand the origins of policing. But what happens is when we are confronted with information and insight that contradicts our bias, we reject it wholesale. So people aren't even willing to have the conversation when they're confronted. That's why I think privilege is actually more so defined from the perspective of the oppressed, because the privileged person does not realize what they experience is a privilege until somebody else who does not share in that experience brings it to their attention. Like, hey, you know that thing you got? I don't get that. that thing you enjoy, I don't get to enjoy that.
Right.
And it's disconcerting for privileged people. Like, whoa, wait a minute. And confirmation bias is a concept which says whenever you receive information that contradicts what you believe, your personal bias, what you do is you reinterpret that information to confirm whatever your bias is, or you just reject it. So an example, when we talk about white supremacy in terms of privilege, and people always, I'll give you an example of privilege: black on black crime. Black on black crime is such a privileged statement. So
tell us.
This notion of black on black crime that keeps getting played over and over and over again in society is a privileged statement because it gives white people the benefit of the doubt. We only look at the statistics about crime that black people commit against other black people, but most people in America are just smart enough to remember and quote statistics that confirm their bias, but they're not smart enough to analyze those statistics.
My.
Come on.
So we can quote the statistics, but then when it comes time to analyze it, oh, well, the rate of crime from white people to white people is almost identical to the rate of crime from black people to black people, but we never talk about white on white crime. That's privilege. Also, another thing, we talk about the mass incarceration system, and we talk about how Black people make up a disproportionate number of people incarcerated. Then, people say, well, there are more white people in prison than Black people. Yeah, we're talking about proportions. Like,
Right.
we're not talking about just raw numbers, we're talking about proportions. If my people make up 13% of the population, but we make up over 40% of the prison population, that's disproportionate. We're talking about proportions here. So you're smart enough to quote the statistics, but you're not smart enough to actually analyze them. And then people respond with this, well, Black people will account for 50% of homicides. Absolutely. That is a true statistic. I looked it up for myself because you know what? I don't want to just disregard the statistics that don't confirm what I think. So I went and looked that up. That is an accurate statistic. We make up a disproportionate number of homicides in this country, but that does not account for how many people are in prison, because homicides make up less than 10% of the prison population. Less than 10% of the entire prison population. Most people in prison are not there for homicide. So you can't say we make up this disproportionate number of people in prison because of homicide, when homicide is such a small percentage of people in prison. During the crack epidemic, people weren't going to jail for murder. They were going to jail for low level, like, drug possession. So,
which was flooded into their neighborhoods.
Exactly. Like, that's a whole right. So this is the question I always ask people before you judge a person who has been swept into the prison industrial complex, before you judge somebody who is a felon, and many of them are considered criminals or felons for drug possession. I want you to ask yourself, have you ever possessed an illegal substance? Whether you snorted it, whether you smoked it or not. Did you hold it in your hand for any period of time? Were you in a vehicle with somebody that had it? Because if you were, you're no different than the person that you judged. The only difference between you and them is that they got caught and you didn't. So save your critique and your condemnation for yourself, because that's your privilege talking. Wow. There was a study in Ferguson after the Mike Brown incident, and this is Department of Justice. Go fact check me if you need to. They talk about how Black people were twice as likely to be searched by police when they were pulled over as white people. Yet white people, when they did an analysis of all the searches, white people were more likely to have illegal contraband in their vehicles. So you search Black people twice as much, but white people are more likely to have the illegal substances. Privilege.
That's right.
That's why I think we have to define it oftentimes from the perspective of the oppressed, because the privileged don't even know what it is until an oppressed person tells them. I didn't know how privileged I was as a straight person until an oppressed gay person told me. I was like, dang, you know what? I never thought about that. So I just think that's something that it requires some work. If you're going to confront privilege, it requires work on your part. You have to think, okay, what areas in life do I experience privilege that others do not? Like, how do you two see privilege playing out in the systems of oppression? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think one thing that I wanted to respond to with regard to proportion is that the way that privilege works and the way that confirmation bias works will send people through Olympic worthy mental gymnastics.
Ooh, like yes.
White people, straight people,
yes,
should have gold medals in mental gymnastics.
Privileged people turn into Simone Biles when it comes time to confront they bias. Like, I'm talking about, they do some of the most amazing stunts. Oh my God! Continue, Grayson. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I haven't eaten enough today, and this tequila is hitting me real good. I am on a different level, but I will self-awareness. will contain myself. Yes, and so I think one example is, and I think I'm going to get his name wrong, Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist. Ibram X. Kendi talked about how so often, with specific reference to racism, that what has been systemically done, what has been politically done, what has been financially done, economically done to Black people in particular, but brown people, other people, but Black people in particular, is blamed on the people themselves. So the Black on Black crime statistic, the mass incarceration statistic. I was having a conversation on Grindr with a guy about all of this, having a racial argument at 12 o'clock midnight on Grindr.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Now, where you thought that conversation was going to go?
Oh no, I knew exactly where it was going to go because I put hashtag BLM in my profile name, and this white dude who only had a torso photo, not a headshot, was like, all lives matter, not just Black lives. And I was like, okay, I'm rush in and have this conversation. And it was just a bunch of foolishness. But he did, like, it's predictable. White people love to think of ourselves as individuals, but we are as mass-produced and predictable as a quarter pounder from McDonald's. And just about as full of nutrients.
On a roll.
Oh, good.
So, and he said things, he literally said, Black people aren't oppressed. It's a fact. And he was saying, and I'm using him as a placeholder for a larger system of belief. Because again, many people subscribe to it. That if these things are happening to Black people within Black communities, then clearly it must be something wrong with them, which is a racist idea, because it's like something is inherently different about this group of people than this group of people, and that's why they're acting this way. And okay, I can push all of this guilt and all of this rage and questioning onto them and individualize it, as opposed to really wrestling with what it means to be a human connected to other humans, both systemically and cosmically. We're all connected, we're all one, we're all made of the same stuff. And we're also responsible to one another because we're all wrapped up in a society and in systems. So this mental gymnastics and the disproportion argument, which I subscribe to and echo, imagine if that played out with LGBTQ homelessness, because a disproportionate amount of homeless youth are LGBTQ, 40%, and we make up 8 to 10%, depending on the metrics, of the population. Mm-hmm. And within that 40%, a disproportionate amount are Black LGBTQ youth. So mental gymnastics would have people say, well, I guess gay people just don't like homes.
Especially the gay Black.
I guess, exactly. I guess gay Black people, LGBTQ Black people are just nomadic by nature. I guess it's in their genes to not want to have a place to rest their head at night, because the nomads in pre-colonial Africa, I don't know. And so that's a perfect example of disproportion. And I have never heard the argument that there's something about LGBTQ people that makes us not like living in houses. But that's essentially the same logic that is applied to people of color for anything that they, quote, 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 are doing. And I think what that all boils down to is something that Paul didn't think I was going to bring him up. Whenever he uses the word natural, especially in Romans 1, but also with reference to women covering their heads, having long hair for men, he uses the term that is translated as natural, which in translation seems to communicate to people that this is the way that God created the world to naturally function.
Mm-hmm.
But what Paul is actually using that word, and I don't know the Greek word. Dr. Parker, if she sees this, will probably bang her hand on the steering wheel. I don't know the Greek word, but it's more so this is what is societally constructed and viewed as natural. And so I think when we see Black people, as you were saying, Karima, in a place where they ain't supposed to be, you're not supposed to be here. What are you doing in this neighborhood, this school, this church, this political institution, this whatever? When you see any oppressed group, what are you doing in the institution of marriage? What are you doing in the in this room that is not meant for people without abled bodies with disability? It is because we take the definition of natural as it has been translated and saying this is the way that God created the world. Right now, there are fruit flies all over this apartment because my roommate left out an avocado a few weeks ago. Not to shade him, it's just a fact. And so when I see these fruit flies, I pull out the spray and I spray them because they're not supposed to be here. That's not natural. Y'all are supposed to be out there, and I'm attacking them because they're simply in a place that I have said they're not supposed to be based on my definition of what is natural and good. And so I think when people refuse to wake up to the constructed reality in which they live, the reality made by political decisions and financial decisions and legal decisions, when they refuse to do that, they see a Black person in a white neighborhood as unnatural and therefore ungodly, because God made the world to be white people have status, immunity, wealth, power, etc. Straight people, abled people, whatever. And so whenever we don't wake up to things, the systems of oppression, the systems of America, the existence of America is just taken as a granted and natural reality. Columbus discovered the idea of America that was just waiting for somebody to find it, and which is not true, obviously. And so we have to divorce our ideas of constructed reality from natural reality and realize that we can no longer say that for a person to be where we have decided they are not supposed to be is grounds for us to attack them just as I'm attacking these fruit flies. Because it is not natural. It's based off decisions. It didn't have to be this way. As I always forget his name, the author of Color of Compromise.
Jamar Tisby.
Jamar Tisby. He says it didn't have to be this way. Andre Henry said it doesn't have to be this way. But if you don't wake up to it, then you're just a fish swimming in water. You're just a fish breathing air. And when somebody says, oh, actually, you're stealing that air from somebody else, you're stealing that water that you've been swimming in your whole life, which is probably like rotten milk anyway, because like people with privilege are getting pissed on and convincing ourselves that it's rain because it's probably benefiting somebody else and not us. It's the same thing with like whenever you've been eating sugar your entire life and then somebody said, here, have a vegetable. That's actually good for you. People who haven't adjusted their tastes will reject what is good for them because it doesn't adhere to what they have been comfortable with, what they have been conditioned to, what they have been addicted to. And so we have to embrace natural reality, which is that we're all connected, and stop drinking piss and thinking it's rain, stop eating sugar and thinking it's nutritious, and actually listening to the people who are providing us life and life abundant.
All right, the word for the day from Grayson is stop drinking piss and thinking it's rain.
As Wanda Sykes said, nothing good ever trickled down.
Right. If someone's trickling down on you, it's piss.
Amen. And if you're into that, that's fine. But just be aware.
And that piece about natural is so important, Grayson, because that's the argument that a lot of privileged people make when it comes to sexual orientation. That that same gender attraction is not natural. And I think what we tend to do is we think what is natural for me must be natural for all of creation. And Yeah, give Grayson some more tequila. Yeah, so I'm constantly trying to challenge people to say, hey, just because it's natural for you doesn't mean it's natural for everybody else.
Right.
Like, just because your skin is naturally brown doesn't mean everybody else's skin is going to be naturally brown. Like,
Right.
nature takes different forms. So don't judge all of creation by what is natural for you,
Yeah.
but instead, I always go back to the greatest commandment. Consider what that person is doing or how that person exists, and then ask yourself, does it in any way harm themselves or anybody in their surroundings, any of their neighbors? Are they causing harm to anybody? Is the existence of a gay person causing harm to you? And
Or is it
make
just
sure,
discomfort?
yeah, exactly. Or are you just uncomfortable with their existence?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're merely uncomfortable, you have the responsibility to deal with your discomfort.
That's right.
You cannot outsource the burden of your discomfort to the person whose existence makes you uncomfortable. That's your own inner work you need to do.
And one thing I
So
want to say, Christian, and then I'll hop off. I just want to hop in and say, if your argument is something is unnatural based on Christianity and the Bible and your church, last time I went hiking, I would be more likely to see two male bears humping each other than to see a Bible or a church. Neither the Bible nor the church are natural, and you will not find it in nature, but you probably will find homosexuality and different skin tones. That's all I wanted to say. Carry on.
Karima, I'm gonna let you go after that. What you got to say after that?
Right now, I'm trying to get the image of the two bears out of my head right now.
I'm done.
Trying to work on that right there. But just thinking about this is such a rich discussion, and there's one thing that I'm going to save until the very end, but the systems of oppression and the systems of prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or control. That's what oppression means. A system of prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment. And so then how does privilege play into that, and what do we do? Those who created that system obviously benefit from those who are oppressed, benefit from that oppression by creating that separation or that chasm from themselves and those who are receiving the oppression. And over time, because this is a system, it is prolonged. It is something that no one presently was there when these things began and were started. So we cannot even remember, because we don't know what it was supposed to look like before these systems were put into place. And so then the question is, now what do we do? It's clear and it's obvious that there are things that were put in place in order to prolong this oppression. So back to what you said at the top of the conversation, these immune systems that have been so sheltered are now receiving the blow of this prolonged treatment. Now they're seeing the effects of it. Now they are finally, in some twisted way, being able to feel the same experience. And so number one, I would say, let that happen. Feel that. And, there's a place in repentance when, before I can turn away from the thing that I wasn't supposed to do, I first have to deal with the reckoning or the feeling or that sadness that I have, right? Because if that is not allowed to fester to a degree, then what is it to keep me from continuing on in that direction? So there first must come a point where something in me is slapped into saying, this isn't right. And then there needs to be some type of sadness or acknowledgement of that emotion that comes when I experience, oh my God, I've been doing something all this time that is not well. Allow that its due time. And so in order for these systems of oppression to be dismantled, where we are right now in the country is feeling that shock right? The privileged are seeing that for the first time. Allow that to breathe. I'm not in a rush for this moment to move by. Sit and marinate for a minute. Sometimes, sometimes you got to let the medicine get all the way down into the white meat, like we used to call it. You know what I mean? Let it get all the way down in there and bust all that stuff up so that the infection can ooze out, right? The antibodies have to do their work. And if we rush in too quickly, then we will prevent it. We will stop it off too short. Allow it to trickle all the way down to the root. Now, that is an uncomfortable feeling. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't look good. During this time, it can't function well. When your body is sick, when your body is dealing with a virus, you have a temperature. You feel lethargic. You need to just sit for a minute. And I feel like that's what's happening, that as those who are privileged and hold this immunity are finally feeling the effects of this injection, let that do what it's supposed. It is painful, and it's supposed to be painful. Let that sit for a minute. And then we can talk about, well, now that you've received this virus, now that your body and your immune system has it and has never had it before, now we could talk about the effects of the antibodies. Now we could talk about what's going to happen on the other side. Let that breathe for a minute. So as all of this is now being broken up, I'm sitting back and eating me some popcorn and just watching this whole thing play.
Right.
I'm like,
right.
Jackson me like, let me see what they gonna do now. Y'all gonna get a call? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Gonna get some breakup in house or something? You know what I'm saying? Because my ass done had scars. Splinters, you know what I'm saying? Whipped across my back. We've been at this now for 400 years.
Right.
Y'all go right ahead. Let me know when it's running full force. Let me know.
Exactly. Exactly. Privilege in most situations is a byproduct of oppression.
Yeah.
I think privilege flows out of oppression, so that when you create systems of oppression, you also create privileges for people who are not in those oppressed groups. So that is how it plays out in systems of oppression to me. Once you create a system of oppression, you create privileged groups.
Yep.
And we need to wrestle with that. What I would say to people, because I think it's important that we at Holy Smokes not only critique the culture as a way to call out the bullshit, but also recommend some ways that we can do better. I think I quoted either on the last episode or before that Jesus said the poor will always be among you. Jesus did not say that as an ideal ethic, that the poor should always be here. What Jesus was saying is that the poor will always be among you because people in power will always do what they can to keep poor people impoverished. So that's right. Our responsibility, when we think about our privilege, the responsibility that comes with our privilege is to do what we can to dismantle those systems of oppression that keep certain people privileged and keep other people impoverished. So what you can do as an individual is do a self-inventory of your own personal privileges. That requires work, because privilege comes with responsibility. When was the last time you did a self-assessment of the privileges that you have at the expense of someone else? Do that own internal work, and you will change the world just by changing yourself. If you will actually assess yourself, you will change the world, because you change the world one person at a time. Start with you. Then when it comes to working with other people, this is just my personal philosophy. I have much more energy to give to people who share in my privilege than to give to people who oppress me. So say that again. I have much more energy to give to people who share in my privilege than I do to people that oppress me. So when I'm doing this work of trying to dismantle systems of oppression, I'm very patient with my fellow privileged people who can't see their privilege for anything and many times are willfully ignorant, but there's something in them that really wants to understand my perspective. I'll allow them to say all the dumb asinine stuff that they want to say to me because what they're saying is not rooted in my oppression. So I don't take it personal.
That's right.
I'm not going to give that energy to somebody who's trying to oppress me. You can kiss my ass.
You
need to go. You can go talk to one of your other privileged friends and figure that out amongst yourselves. Because I'm not going to keep explaining to you why Black Lives Matter. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not. Right? Go talk to Grayson. Grayson will have all the patience that one needs to have that conversation. I'm not going to be the one. So as we go through this process, first of all, give the energy to yourself to assess your own privilege. And then when you acknowledge that, talk to other people who share in that privilege with you to help them do the self-assessment that you did for yourself. And then be protective of your energy. Don't give too much energy to people who disagree with you, and their disagreement is based in your lack of humanity and not having the right to exist. Don't give all your energy to those people. It's going to wear you out. That is my pastoral advice. Don't give that much energy to those people. Don't do it. Save your energy for working on yourself. Change yourself. Change the people who share in that privilege with you, who are open to having the discussion and open to learning. And then let the oppressive people work that out amongst themselves. Like Karima said, sit back, eat your popcorn, and let me see how y'all work this out. I just want to see how this plays out, because I've been dealing with this my whole life. My parents dealt with this, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, all the way back to my ancestors who were stripped from the shores of Africa, been dealing with this same shit since then. So I'm not about to give you all that energy. I want to watch y'all do it. And let me say, it's a beautiful thing to watch my white allies dismantle the systems of oppression that impact me. It's a beautiful thing to watch, but I can't give you that energy. So that's my recommendation. Grayson, if you have anything about how we can dismantle these systems in 2 or 3 minutes, and then I want to hand it off to Karima to give us our final word.
And alternatively, it's a beautiful thing for me to see straight people, cisgender people working to dismantle systems of oppression to keep LGBTQ people down. And especially where I'm coming from, I love it when people of color, straight people of color, speak to issues that I have to be very careful about how I speak to, because I am very passionate about racial justice and LGBTQ justice, but I have to be very aware of how I speak to how those oppressions and those identities intersect. And that's a whole other conversation, because I am both privileged and marginalized, as most of us are.
Right.
I'd say the vast majority are. And that's a paradox that we all have to live in, and a tension we all have to live in and make music out of. So I think, but I will speak to our fellow white people who are listening to this. The first recommendation is to try some spice. It's good. Spice isn't your enemy. Rhythm isn't your enemy. Try dancing. Try something else besides salt and pepper. Paprika won't hurt you.
Garlic powder. Garlic powder is your best friend. Garlic powder and onion powder goes on everything.
Wait, garlic powder or garlic salt?
Garlic powder.
Okay.
Yeah. Because see, you can overdo garlic salt. I have never overdone garlic powder. Now, and that's just in my personal experience.
Gotcha.
Garlic powder and onion powder will set you free. So just give it a shot. Give it a shot.
But seriously, I think I'm increasingly convicted by the notion that white supremacy, makes white people into both victims and victimizers, in the sense that, and I'm going to quote my boyfriend James Baldwin, that, or paraphrase, that, do I need to add some money to the jar for this? Did we make that official?
No, we welcome the James Baldwin quotes. It's the bad puns that we're gonna call you on, because like half
Okay.
your puns are good, and then half of them it's like, oh God, he didn't just say that, did he? So no, you're good.
Okay. So to paraphrase James Baldwin, he talks about how what happens to the soul of a person, and in this context it's white people, what happens to the soul, the heart, the humanity of a white person who can, and I'm going to relativize it, I'm going to contextualize it to our context, who can see the almost 9-minute video of George Floyd being murdered, being lynched. The soul of a white person who can look at that and find more comfort in platitudes, which is maxims, which is catchphrases like all lives matter or blue lives matter or whatever they flee to, whatever we flee to. If you can find more comfort in the reality, in this catchphrase of all lives matter, then you can find discomfort in the reality of a black man getting lynched by the knee of a white police officer for almost 9 minutes. Then whatever happened to you, white person, is to your soul is ultimately much worse than whatever happened to George Floyd, because he died murdered. He was murdered with his soul intact, with his humanity intact. But if you can look at somebody being brutally lynched and not feel anything but a desire to escape that discomfort, then you are a victim of the very system you claim to support. And so I want to say, as a means of moving forward, is realizing that white supremacy is not nutritious. White supremacy is not life-giving. And if you and white people, we need to realize that in choosing and working to ally ourselves as much as is responsible and appropriate to the people whose identity were created in abjection to our own. And abjection means it is not this, so it must be that. When you create an object, you necessarily create an abject. When you create a this in a binary dollar jar, I defined it.
Nah, you just dropped so many words.
Right.
Yeah,
About
you
$5
just
right now.
yeah, about $5. Keep going.
Okay, I'll take it. Reparations, something. So abject is in a binary system, a 1-0 either or, this or that system. When you create an identity, you create an anti-identity. You create an abject. So white people's identities created to distance ourselves and define ourselves against those whom we called black. To do that and continue to choose to do that robs us, white people, of humanity, of joy. So when I started by saying, try some spice in your life, try some rhythm in your life, that's actually not that joking, because the fact that we don't tolerate spice, the fact that we don't have rhythm, the fact that we don't have hashtags like white boy joy or white girl magic means that we have robbed ourselves of our ability to be good human people in the name of having beautiful homes or well-ordered lawns or nice cars or stacked bank accounts. And so what we need to do moving forward is realize that if we are to be human, we can no longer be white, because those two ideologies are very opposed to one another and cannot coexist. And so if we are to reclaim our souls and remove the stone around our heart, the only way to do that is to see the video of George Floyd, and I didn't watch it. I do want to be clear. I'm not suggesting you have to watch those videos, but to see oppression happen and shed a tear, to see oppression happen and then say, I'm feeling this emotion, which is leading me to want to do something, and then do something. Because ultimately, you are doing it for yourself too, to become not a white person, but a human person.
Thank you, Grayson. Well said. Karima, give us the final word, and we're gonna shut it down today.
All right. That's shut it down. That's really to shut it down or not. Do we shut it down or do we
Ooh.
Do we shut it down, break it down, stop it, or do we let it flow for everyone? That is my final question. When we look at privilege and what it is, right? Privilege is defined as a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. There are some words within the definition of privilege that are isolating: special and only. Special and only. If we look at special, special means better, greater, or otherwise different from what is usual. From what is usual. Now, so if we, again, this is coming from the perspective of whom. It's usual for who. So the thing that popped into my head, y'all know I got 6 kids. And so, I live in the world of children oftentimes. And so when I think about this idea of privilege or special right, or advantage or immunity granted or only available to a particular group, the first thing that popped into my mind was the movie The Incredibles. And if you remember that movie,
Yes.
right? Everybody, a certain group of people had special powers or privileges, if you will, right? There's the main character, Mr. Incredible, and his wife. What was she? She was the Elastigirl. That was her, right? Stretch out her little arms, her little legs. Yeah, Elastigirl. And then they had the 3 children. Then they had their friends and whatnot, the black dude, Ice, right? And so all these people had special... Frozone, that's right. Where's my super suit? Frozone.
I'm the greatest good you're ever going to get.
That's exactly what my children would quote if they were here. And then, there's the little boy who looked up, Billy, right? Who looked up to Mr. Incredible and who just wanted to do everything that Mr. Incredible did. And so Mr. Incredible kept, pushing him aside, whatever, run home, Billy. And he grew up to be Syndrome, right? So he decided to create all of these different gadgets and whatnot that in his mind would give him the same abilities that Mr. Incredible had. And so there's this one scene where Syndrome has captured Mr. Incredible, and he's monologuing and telling him, what it is that he's going to do. He's going to build these inventions and he's going to give it to everybody. And then his line is, he says, everyone can be super. And when everyone is super, no one will be. And so my question is, what do we do with privilege? Do we break it down or do we build it up? Do we tear off the roof or do we raise the floor? If you are considered privileged, do you give it away, deny it, or do you build up the floor so that everyone is privileged? And then in doing so, the word usual, right? Because special means usual. So if it's a better, greater, or otherwise different from what is usual, well, what if there is a way that privilege can be the new usual, where it is normal for everyone to operate in their privilege? Because now if we raise the floor, then now everybody is privileged. And then would the word itself still have a place and meaning? And
right.
that, as a person who studies words, the history of words, the etymology of words, that's the history of words, where words come from, you'll see over time that there were words that had meaning. That's not the damn dollar jar. I just said what it meant.
She
Etymology.
did. She did.
The history of words. I just
She did.
Listen, I would find mine too. So if we're gonna raise that floor,
fine. I give y'all dollars for the good cause. No problem. But that's just it. You know, when we look over the history of words, there's a time when society took on a different meaning and view of those words, and those words no longer meant anything. They didn't mean anything anymore because the agreement of a group of people said that that word and that definition is no longer needed. It is no longer valid. And so imagine a time and a place where the word privilege doesn't even exist anymore, because the new norm and the what is right now, right? We are all endowed by the basic nature of we are God's creation. I'm special. I have a special right and advantage and privilege simply because that I am here, simply because of my beingness. That alone is privilege. And so that's just my question. What do we do with it? Do we raise the floor or do we tear off the ceiling?
And I think in the words of Greg DeLoach, we got to do something. If the ideal situation is for privilege to not be a necessary term, denying the reality of its existence is not an option.
Right.
So this has been Holy Smoke, Cigars and Spirituality. I hope after engaging this episode, you have some language that will help you to define privilege, that will help you to discuss privilege when necessary. A lot was discussed here, so please go back, watch it again, listen to it again, because this topic isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So I hope that we were able to provide some insight on it. Shout out to all of our patrons and our live audience today for kicking it with us. Thank you for your excellent questions and your feedback. We appreciate you. And we'll see you next time right here on Holy Smokes, Cigars and Spirituality. Peace out.